And I stopped the vehicle the first time we drove up here. And I said, what am I looking at right now? And gave me the chills. My name is Jeffrey. I'm the owner of Mount Totumas Cloud Forest, and we have been here now 15 years. We came here in 2008, and actually, a little background. I studied ecology when I was young. I was a bird watcher since I was 12 years old, um, and studied studied ecology in the university, and was very enamored with wilderness. And so after graduating from college, I had a number of adventurous years, doing extensive backpacking trips, extensive canoe trips way up in the Yukon and Churchill River in Saskatchewan, for example. So I had a pretty adventurous life in my 20s, doing just really dedicated to wilderness. I became a counselor, a wilderness counselor for a few programs. And so that was my 20s. And then I went into business later and eventually was working in Latin America, uh, doing sales and distribution for medical research optics, which uh, gave me the opportunity to have a 15 years traveling extensively through South America. That's where I learned Spanish. Actually, I learned Spanish in an orphanage in Mexico when I was 20. That was my first experience. And so the what in those 15 years that I was in business in Latin America, having been a naturalist in my studies and a lover of nature, bird watcher since I was young, I would combine my business trips sometimes, like planning to go to Ecolodges. I was in Quito, Ecuador, or Lima, Peru, or Chile or Argentina. I was going to Ecolodges as a guest to watch birds, and that was the beginning of a seed that planted in my mind to one day maybe buy some land and do conservation and do ecotourism. So I didn't come to Panama like green, not knowing anything and coming up here and buying this place far away. No, there was an incubating, there was a long process. My past as an ecologist, 15 years experience in Latin America traveling and visiting eco lodges. And so, and I should mention that I was not so interested in lowland rainforests. I grew up in the mountains in Pennsylvania, and I saw a resplendent Quetzal in a cloud forest when I was 20 years old in Chiapas, Mexico, for the first time. So early on, I had an affinity toward the montane tropics. I'd been in cloud forests in Costa Rica, in Bolivia, in Venezuela. I hiked the Inca Trail in Peru years and years ago, which has a lot of beautiful cloud forest habitat. So I was targeting a cloud forest specifically. Panama was not an early candidate of where I wanted to go. It was not even on my radar. Like a lot of people, my early idea, even though I had 15 years of travel and business, my trips to Panama were only to Panama City to visit a few universities or hospitals. I never went outside of the capital. So, like a lot of people, Panama for me was the Darien and the canal. And I never realized that in far western Panama, in the highlands, there was cloud forest habitat. And one day, while I was researching, I started looking into Amistad National Park. I realized that 20% of it was in Panama and 80% was in Costa Rica. And that was then, okay, let's make a trip to Panama. Let's visit the Western Highlands. So that was back in 2008. So I should also mention that when I was early on in the search for a place, there were countries that I was not considering as an option. Costa Rica was out. They have commodified and overdeveloped their tourism, in my opinion. So they have done wonderful things ecologically. So a lot of praise for what Costa Rica pioneered in ecotourism. But I found that space too crowded. So I was not thinking of Costa Rica as a country. And at that time, Venezuela was beginning to fall apart. Colombia still was rough. Today, Colombia has an incredible ecotourism industry growing. But back then, when I was considering a place, Colombia was still a little rough. So I was looking at Ecuador, I was looking at Peru. And then when I realized that Panama has this cloud forest habitat, we made a kind of exploratory holiday trip here in 2008. And I rented a Prado 4x4, and between Boquete and the Costa Rican border, we were going up and down all these 4x4 roads, just like checking out the area. And then I heard about a piece of land that was for sale, and we came up here to the land here, and it was a cattle farm at that time. So it's 400 acres. Half of it was pasture, and half of it was cloud forest. And when I first drove up, you're down in the you're going on a rough 4x4 road for 7 kilometers. You're down in the valley. You're looking around, and so because I had an ecologist's eye, I was watching the road and watching the land as we drove up the very first time. So I saw dairy farms, overgrazed cow pasture, coffee farms. I saw some really, really nice patches of fragmented, mature second growth forest that looked very nice, but I didn't see anything that called to me. Nothing really, no emotional reaction with anything I was seeing on that drive up until we got on this land. And so we crossed the river, and after you cross the Rio Colorado, you begin climbing up and lifting out of the valley, and you get the view of all the Cordillera. You get the view of Amistad National Park, Continental Divide, and all these 8,000, higher than 8,000 feet mountains. And I stopped the vehicle the first time we drove up here, and I said, what am I looking at right now? And it gave me the chills. So there was an immediate emotional relationship the very first time I saw this piece of property, even though it was rough. It had half of it was overgrazed cow pasture. The previous owners had extensive pastures, and but it also had half of the land was mature forest. So my very first day here, we spent the night when we came up and saw the place the first time. And my very first day, I went off on an early morning hike. I saw resplendent quetzals. I saw 3 wattle bellbirds. I saw spider monkeys on that very first morning walk. And I said, okay, this place has potential. That's a little bit the history of how we came here. I had been incubating this idea to buy a property. When you're in your mind, you have an internal narrative about a place you'd like to buy. But then if there's actually the physical place suddenly presents itself, then you've got a major decision, because now you're not just thinking about something, you're actually now going to pull the trigger and make a big decision, right? So we did it. And the first couple years, I had to leave my daughters in high school in Seattle, my wife. I flew down here. I rented a little Suzuki Jimmy. I came up here, no internet, no electricity. I had one farm worker that I had hired, and I had no buyer's remorse, but I had a feeling of overwhelming challenge of what this is going to take to develop. So I always went through this portal for the first 2 days, almost despondent, like thinking, how am I going to get materials up here? How am I going to find good people? And I went through 2 days of despair. And then the third morning I'd wake up and see where I was, and I was going, oh yeah, okay, now I know why I did this. And so that's a process when you go to a new place, even for example, even if you're within your own country, say you're in the States and you're moving from Pennsylvania to Kansas, you're going to be green. You're not going to know the best workers. You're going to have a process. So that same process happens anywhere. So it took a number of years to find the right group of people. And yeah, We're now here 15 years. The, the, the business is self-sustaining. We no longer work with intermediaries. We don't work with booking.com. We don't have any intermediaries, no Airbnb. We are, the ecotourism business is economically self-sustaining now without any third parties in the middle. Word of mouth, we're on Lonely Planet where we work with birding tour companies. And so the ecotourist business has matured in a way that it's economically sustaining itself, which was always the goal in the beginning. We didn't come here to make money. We didn't come here to do a business. But whatever you're going to do with passion, you do have to look at the foundation of any project is that you can make it economically sustainable. And so the first 8 years, we had to bring capital from overseas to finance the build out, the purchase and the build out. And starting in 2016, 2017, we never had to infuse capital again. It was self-sustaining. The business was self-sustaining. We came here to do ecotourism and to do conservation, but we ended up landing in the elevation, which happens to be the perfect elevation for growing a very famous specialty coffee here in Panama, Geisha. And we had no interest in coffee when we came here. We didn't know anything about coffee, but we were hearing from locals, oh, you should plant some coffee. You're at the right elevation. So we started with 400 trees back in 2013, 2014. And after a few years of trial and error, they started doing well. And the first harvest, when we tried the coffee, we invited some coffee growers up, and they were very encouraging. That was the beginning. Our coffee business now we have 28,000 trees, and our coffee business also now has reached, since 2 years. 2 years ago, we reached a place where we could cover the expenses of all the staff, and the coffee business is also, it's generating a small profit for us. So yeah, my daughter Corinne is the one who runs the whole coffee business. She went to culinary school, and she knew a lot about fermentation and stuff, and she applied some of that knowledge to the processing of the coffee. And so we developed a few interesting fermentation processes with the geisha coffee, and that resulted in us winning first place in the national competition 2 years ago. That kind of put us on the map. And afterwards, we had international buyers coming and visiting us. And so the coffee business is a big surprise, unexpected and unintended, and which is good. The good thing about our coffee business is we didn't have to cut down any forests to plant coffee trees. All of our more or less 25 acres of coffee is on former pasture. So our second year here, after purchasing the land, we started removing the livestock and we started reforesting. And so when we started planting coffee, we had former pasture that was already reforesting with pioneer species for 5 years. And it was kind of ideal for planting coffee, even though that wasn't the reason why we weren't prepping the land for coffee. We were just doing reforestation, but it ended up working pretty good for planting coffee. We have 11 rooms, and we have a private cabin and a tree house, which is popular. And then we have 9 rooms. So we have a total of 11 accommodations here. And we're not going to grow anymore. We've topped out at 11, and that's the perfect amount. Actually, one thing that's really important is that we're off the grid here, and we generate power with a Pelton wheel, with it's a micro hydro, and it puts out 8 kilowatts, which is a good amount of power. So our project is defined by that energy that we produce, and so even though the demand might be there to expand in terms of putting in more guest rooms, we're not interested in doing that. We partially came here to semi-retire, not to recreate another headache of hard work. So at 11 rooms, that's a good amount. And you know, you have to think about it. We're not only housing the tourists, we're housing our 17 employees, and everybody who works here lives here. So that's part of the challenge. And so the guests who come here are mainly nature lovers, bird watchers. Some have very specific interests, herpetologists, orchid specialists, general nature lovers. And we have a network of trails. There's 25 kilometers of trails inside our reserve. And we have trekking destinations into La Amistad National Park for folks that like to have a full day and climb to the top of Mount Totumas or yeah. So we have two guides. Ronaldo is our main guide. He's a certified guide here in Chiriqui. He's Nobe. He's indigenous. He's the first indigenous Nobe certified guide in Chiriqui. And he is the son of my farm administrator. And Ronaldo was coming up here when he was 12 years old and 13 years old on his summer holidays. And he just started informally following guests around and showing them the birds. And he showed a really keen interest in that. And so when he was 14, 15, I started having him informally guiding. And through the years, he participated in a number of courses, and he got his certification in, I think it was 2019 or 2020. And he's the best. He, of all my Panamanian staff, he speaks the best English because he had no choice. So whenever he was he was, you know, learning a language is not just looking in a language book and trying to learn a language. You learn a language in an applied way. So he's out there in the field and he's trying to explain to guests what he's looking at. And in that context, he was able to learn English really fast. And he passed a lot of my other employees in language knowledge quite quickly because of the context of being in the forest and sharing with our guests the wildlife they're seeing. And so he was able to build on that language. It was quite amazing to see how quickly he did learn. And he knows the birds now better than me and the calls. So yeah, and his brother now, David, is our second guide, and he's also learning. So guests that come up here, you know, being in a remote location, so what we offer is a pristine cloud forest experience off the grid in a remote location. Nature dominates here, and you feel that when you're here. We're not a place to come if you want to have a base to explore Chiriqui. The road is too remote and too difficult in access. So folks that come up here really are coming up here to immerse themselves in nature for 3, 4, 5 days. And that's really the objective of the project. So there are coffee tours that we offer. We offer guided hikes. There's a public hot springs that we have a trail down to. Everyone from general nature lovers that just like to walk in the forest to dedicated ecologists and bird watchers. Those are the key guests that come here. In the montane cloud forest, there are two iconic bird species that a lot of people come up here. That's their objective to see. One is a resplendent quetzal. The other is a three-wattled bellbird. Both are present here and both are breeding here, and they're relatively easy to see in the breeding season. Then we have our bird list is now up to 290. So we've, and that includes part of the public road coming up. So we've documented 290 species of birds. We have documented 24 species of hummingbirds here. At any given time, there'll be 11 or 12 species. Some are seasonal, others not. And so we have hummingbird feeders and also fruit feeders up. And in terms of the mammals, because our 400 acres is bordering directly over 1 million acres of La Amistad National Park, all the keystone predators, and all of the major mammals that you see in La Amistad are coming onto our reserve. And we know that because we have 11 game cameras, and we have placed those strategically on our trails and also in La Amistad National Park. So big cats, we have pumas and we have jaguars. We've documented both. Actually, we've documented 7 individual jaguars on our reserve, because it's very easy to distinguish individuals because their spot patterns, or each animal has a unique spot pattern. So you can do a side-by-side comparison and you can tell, you can actually distinguish. So the first 8 years here, we did not document any jaguars. And then starting in 2018, we documented the first jaguar. And the reason why we didn't have them in the early years was because the previous owners allowed hunting here, and the prey density was depressed. So there were mountain lions here, but there were no jaguars because there was a low density of prey because of hunting. And when we came here, we did not permit hunting, and hunting was on the decline anyway, independent of our arrival here. The trend toward poaching was declining. So after 8 years here, jaguars arrived, and we have documented now 7 individuals. Tapirs, we've documented tapirs. There's 3 species of monkeys here. There's white-faced capuchins and howler monkeys. Those are quite common to see in many areas of Panama. Both of those species of monkeys will do well in lower elevations and in riparian habitat, remnant forests along stream drainages, and smaller forest patches. And both of those monkeys are here. But we also have spider monkeys here. And spider monkeys have been, they're only really holding on in any significant numbers in the Darien and here in the Chiriqui highlands. And so we're very happy that we have spider monkeys here, and that we have a healthy population as well. And so for guests that are hiking the trails, seeing monkeys is very possible. Seeing the big cats is very unlikely, but they are watching you. So very early on in our project, before we had a restaurant and a real complete ecotourist lodge or resort, we were attracting researchers early on, and entomologists were the first group of researchers that came here. And word of mouth spread about our resort, and we started getting a lot of entomologists coming up. And ecologically, highland areas in the neotropics and the American tropics are known for having a lot of endemic species. So the interest of the researchers coming up here was to collect in order to do taxonomy. So the Smithsonian has come up here, researchers from the Smithsonian has come up here, universities in North America and in Europe. We've hosted a lot of researchers, a lot of entomologists, and I can't put exact number it, but I bet there has been at least 30 to 40 new species to science that has been collected here during our 15 years that have been described and is now in the scientific literature from the entomologists that came here. But we also put up light traps for the guests to see the insects that during the rainy season, and it can be quite spectacular, the insects. So it's been in the news the last 10, 15 years about an alarming problem in both Europe and North America of a decline of insects and a decline of insect diversity. We're not seeing that here, but we don't have the pressures that you would have in some of the more developed areas. There's no agriculture up here, so there's no petrochemical usage. There's no artificial lights. Light pollution is a major problem for insect diversity because the insects get confused with the lights at night. And so those factors that have contributed to the decline of insects, we're not really seeing that here because the ecology is pretty intact. Yeah, we also have botanists that come up. The cloud forest is a very unique ecosystem One of the characteristics is the abundance of epiphytes. Epiphytes are plants that use another plant as a structure to grow on. So they can be orchids, they can be bromeliads, they can be cactus. One of the things I found really fascinating when I came here was the blueberry family, which is the Latin name for that family is Ericaceae. I was surprised to learn that blueberry family here in the tropics has a lot of species that are epiphytes that are attaching onto the trees. And you can see the flower structure and the fruit. It reminds you of a blueberry back up north. But it was really cool. That's one thing I learned that I never knew, that the blueberry family in the tropics becomes an epiphyte. That's pretty cool. Guests that want to, we have a website. We are on social media, on Instagram and on Facebook. A lot of guests find it. On our reservation inquiry, I asked people how they found us, and Google, Lonely Planet. My friends came here last year. That is now the most common. And then we do work with tour operators. But a lot of people will just Google cloud forest, Panama, or Ecolodges, Panama, and then we'll come up as an option. And that's how most people find us. And yeah. So yeah, we are not doing any more active marketing. We are at a saturated point in terms of in the high season we're pretty much fully booked, and in the mid season we like not being fully booked. We like in the high season my job is more like an air traffic controller, doing the logistics of transport and everything, and I oftentimes don't have enough time to like sit with the guests. And in the mid season, it's my favorite time of year. It's also my favorite weather, so that's something important. A lot of people avoid the rainy season in the tropics because they think they're going to come down here and it's going to be raining all the time. The rainy season is our favorite time here, especially the first months. So May, June, July, August are my favorite months here because you still have blue sky, sunny mornings. The rains don't start until the afternoon. And when they come, you're seeing the clouds in the Pacific slowly drifting up the valley, and it's spectacularly beautiful. So those early rainy season months are my favorite time here. It's also nice weather up north. That's why we have less. But what draws a lot of tourists from Europe and North America down here in the winter months is because the weather is not so nice up there. But in terms of the most beautiful season of the year to visit us, April, May, June, July, August, even into September. I would say October, November, the rains can get so intense that maybe that is a time that, yes, the rainy season can be, you can come here and have 2 or 3, 4 days of rain. But the early months are wonderful.
Thanks to Jeffrey for taking the time to talk to us about Mount Totumas. Leave any questions you have in the comments. Check out their social media accounts listed in the description below and website at mounttotumas.com.